Schumate to be Assistant Attorneys General. They're listed for the first time and obviously will be held over till our next meeting. This is the second meeting on the nomination of Patrick Davis to serve as Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legislative Affairs. So we'll vote on that today. I know we have several members with busy schedules this morning, so I'll plan to vote on the Davis nomination immediately after Ranking Member Durbin gives his remarks. In regard to Mr. Davis, I won't repeat my introduction from his hearing, but will simply say that he is the right man for this job, and I'm pleased to support him. Mr. Davis used to work for me, and I know that he takes seriously the obligation of the Department of Justice to work with Congress to serve the American people. He'll be an effective public servant, and he should be responsive to committee members' requests. I look forward to continuing our excellent working relationship. Before we get to the vote, I want to address one other matter. It has long been the committee practice that we don't hold hearings on U.S. attorneys' nominations. However, last week, my friend Senator Durbin raised a number of issues about the nomination of Ed Martin to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He initially said that he wanted to hold a vote today on whether to hold a hearing on the nomination. It's my understanding that he has agreed to wait until we receive the written responses from the nominee before he makes that request. Mr. Martin has received over 500 questions for the record from senators on this committee, which is far more than normal for a U.S. attorney nominee. I've submitted questions to Mr. Martin as well. I believe the nominee is entitled to respond in writing under our normal committee practice before the committee takes further action. So if I'm right about what Senator Durbin said, I thank him for working with me on this. Senator Durbin.
You are right, Mr. Chairman, and I'm looking forward to the responses to the questions that we've both sent to Mr. Martin. And before we go into the substance of the hearing, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a member of my staff whose last day is tomorrow. Michael May served as professional staff and head researcher for nominations since 2022. He's worked on more than 200 nominees who've come before the committee. If you were confirmed as a federal judge, U.S. attorney, or U.S. marshal since 2022, there is a good chance that Michael has read everything you've ever posted on social media. In addition to his thorough work, he is much appreciated for his quick wit, willingness to translate Gen Z speak for the rest of my staff. In all seriousness, he's a real professional, and he's helped this committee fulfill its constitutional duty. Our loss is the gain of UC Berkeley Law School, Senator Padilla, so he's headed out to California, his home state, to begin law school this fall. Please join me in thanking Michael for his service to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and my colleagues for considering my concerns regarding the nomination of Ed Martin to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He is seeking to be the lead prosecutor for the Department of Justice in the District of Columbia, a substantial assignment. I understand that Chairman Grassley has submitted questions to Mr. Martin in response to the issues that I raised in a previous meeting, and I have joined him in that effort. We take our responsibility to advise and consent very seriously. I understand Mr. Martin will submit responses during the April recess so that we have an opportunity to review them before we vote on whether to hold a hearing on his nomination. Mr. Martin has a long record of objectionable statements and conduct. I would like to take a few minutes to provide some examples to my colleagues. Mr. Martin has repeatedly attacked law enforcement officers who kept us safe as members of the Senate and staff during the January 6th riot, and the assistant U.S. attorneys who were assigned to prosecute the rioters who brutally attacked police officers. Mr. Martin was at the U.S. Capitol on that day when he posted social media, and I quote, like Mardi Gras in D.C. today, love, faith, and joy, ignore fake news. Mr. Martin had the audacity to call Michael Fanone, a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department who was nearly killed on January 6, quote, a fake cop, words of Ed Martin. When leaders of the Oath Keepers, a domestic violent extremist group, were prosecuted for seditious conspiracy for their role in planning January 6, Mr. Martin responded, quote, Oath Keepers are all of us, close quote. Mr. Martin also has advocated for, quote, less judgment on somebody who hits a cop. That is an appalling statement, especially for someone who's asking this committee to approve his nomination to be the top law enforcement official in the nation's capital. He has repeatedly attacked prosecutors who were assigned to work on January 6 case, calling them, quote, terrorists, and stating, and I quote, when I see these prosecutors, I shun them. I ostracize them socially. I say about them, they are despicable people who decided to do something wrong, end of quote. We also need to hear from Mr. Martin about his close relationship with Timothy Hale Cusinelli, a January 6 rioter and anti-Semitic, racist Nazi sympathizer. You can see his photo. I will not repeat the vile things Mr. Hale Cusinelli has said about Jewish people, black people, and other minorities. These slurs are well documented and extensive. At a time when we are expelling students from the United States for participating in protests where the question is raised as to whether their statements were anti-Semitic, at a time when we are basically deciding that this committee is going on record about the seriousness of this charge of anti-Semitism, to think of some of the things that Mr. Martin has done for his pal, Timothy Hale Cusinelli, is outrageous. Mr. Martin is well aware of Mr. Hale Cusinelli's record. In fact, he has excused Mr. Hale Cusinelli for dressing up like Hitler, quote, saying that he was just goofing around. Just last year, Mr. Martin presented Mr. Hale Cusinelli with an award. Where was the award presented by Mr. Martin to Mr. Hale Cusinelli? At the Trump Bedminster Club in New Jersey, at this place is where Martin said, quote, of Cusinelli, quote, an extraordinary man, an extraordinary leader, this man who dresses up like Adolf Hitler. He continued, and I quote, it's one of the goals of many is to make sure that the world, and especially America, hears more from Tim Hale because he's so extraordinary, quote unquote, Ed Martin. Just last month, while serving as interim U.S. Attorney, Mr. Martin attended an event with Hale Cusinelli, members of the Oath Keepers, and other January 6 offenders, including some whose cases are still on appeal. At this event, Mr. Martin compared the prosecution of January 6 rioters with the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. This false equivalency is alarming, harmful, disrespectful, and disgusting. Another speaker at this event was Douglas Mackey, who has said, quote, women are children with the right to vote. And another quote from Mr. Mackey, black people will believe anything they read, and we let them vote? Why? Question mark. At the event end, Ed Martin praised Mackey as, quote, a leader of people who sees what happens and wants to do something about it. I am describing the friends and political and professional acquaintances of the man who wants to be the chief prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice in the District of Columbia. Mr. Martin must answer for these offensive comments that he's made. Recounting his tenure at CNN, Mr. Martin said, quote, I got fired because of the crazy black ladies on CNN that demanded I be fired because I didn't take their nonsense. The fact that Mr. Martin feels the need to note the race and gender of individuals who cross him speaks volumes about his temperament and character. And just last year, he said in an interview, and I quote, you show me a Jewish American who feels good about the Democratic administration, I'll show you someone who is not really Jewish, end of quote. How dare Mr. Martin pass judgment on someone else's religion? Ed Martin's history raises serious questions about whether he should ever be given the authority of the U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia. One of Martin's first official acts after his appointment as temporary was to fire numerous prosecutors, simply because they were assigned and handled January 6 cases. Less than a month into his tenure, Martin sent a threatening letter to Georgetown University Law Center, claiming that the school, quote, continues to teach and promote DEI. The dean of the law school, William Traynor, rightfully responded, and I quote, given the First Amendment's protection of a university's freedom to determine its own curriculum and how to deliver it, the constitutional violation behind this threat is clear, as is the attack on the university's mission as a Jesuit and Catholic institution, end of quote. The top prosecutor in the nation's capital should be focused on fighting crime and terrorism, not monitoring the curriculum of local law schools. I'll continue to review his record. I can't wait for his answers to the questions, and I hope that members of this committee on both sides of the table will take it seriously when we made that pledge, bipartisan pledge, to do our best to stop anti-Semitism and look honestly at the record of Ed Martin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I hope our members can get here so we can vote on the nomination. Senator Hirano.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I join my colleagues in calling for a hearing on Ed Martin's nomination, and it's bad enough that he praised a white supremacist and Nazi sympathizer, but we know that he wrote in an email to his office that he agrees that prosecuting January 6th insurrectionists with a certain obstruction charge was, and I quote, the greatest failure of legal judgment since Japanese internment. I am just so speechless and appalled that he would even make such a comparison. And we use a Japanese term for this kind of comparison. We call it shibai, basically BS. So plain and simple, nearly every convicted January 6th insurrectionist, 96% of them was convicted of other crimes as well, not just for obstruction. And many of them attacked members of law enforcement. We saw the pictures. It's like, let's not believe what we see with our own eyes. And by contrast, I hope by now every member of this committee knows the Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II did nothing wrong. Comparing January 6th insurrectionists to loyal Americans jailed, you know, their lives were ruined. I hope some of you have read some of the stories of the 125 Japanese Americans who were interned, having their livelihoods ended, their property taken, their lives destroyed because of their race. Is spitting on the memory of these men, women, and children. So we need a hearing on Mr. Martin, and he needs to read some history books, because based on his statement regarding Japanese internment and his praise for Nazi sympathizers, clearly he has no idea what happened during World War II, or he chooses to ignore these facts. I would like him to come before this committee so we can ask him these questions. I seriously question his temperament, his judgment, his character. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Japanese American Citizens League statement of April 9, 2025, condemning Mr. Martin's comparison.
Yeah. So ordered.
Thank you,
Without
Mr.
objection.
Chairman.
Okay. We can go. Can we, Senator Coons, let's vote on this nomination, and then I'll call on you.
Mr. Chairman, I ask consent to put my statement in the record about Mr. Davis's nomination. I would only add that you have been very fortunate. I understand we had multiple letters to the Department of Justice responded to. I've had none. I stood by you when we were in the majority and said that this is a bipartisan request of the committee. I hope you'll do the same.
I do the same, and I want to remind you in February of 2017, when the first Trump administration said that you didn't have to respond to letters only from committee chairmen. I spoke both here and before the House. I don't know which committee in the House, but I spoke that it's a right of all 535 members of Congress to have their oversight letters responded to. Clerk will call the roll on the Davis nomination.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No.
Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Harona.
No.
Mr. Booker.
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Padilla.
No.
Mr. Welch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schiff.
No.
Chairman Grassley.
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 10.
Okay, Mr. Davis will be reported. Now Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the chance to speak to Mr. Davis's nomination. Since President Trump's inauguration, my colleagues and I have sent the Department of Justice a dozen oversight letters and have not received a single response. A letter to Attorney General Bondi about why the pardon attorney was fired, no response. A letter to Attorney General Bondi about the use of Signal to share sensitive information about war plans, no response. A letter to Attorney General Bondi about whether the Deputy Attorney General perjured himself during the nomination hearing before this committee, no response. A letter to Attorney General Bondi about the department's role in issuing pardons to the convicted felons who assaulted police officers on January 6th, no response. Several of our letters went to DOJ while Mr. Davis was heading up the Office of Legislative Affairs, and they remain unanswered. Mr. Davis said in his response to my written questions, he thought oversight letters should be responded to, and I quote, in a matter of days or weeks, not months. But we've been waiting more than 2 months for these responses. When I asked Mr. Davis what he would do, this is in questions for the record, if President Trump asked him to do something illegal or unethical, he refused to respond, saying he rejected the premise of the question. I also urge this committee, and I join with several colleagues, to hold a hearing on Ed Martin's nomination to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. For the reasons my colleagues have already said, he is not fit for this critical position. Chairman Grassley, I applaud your taking the time to think through this question. Your leadership here is noticed and appreciated. Martin is uniquely unqualified. But I want to raise another possibility, which is that this body should have a hearing for Ed Martin, but have hearings for all nominees in the future for U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. These are the two most powerful U.S. Attorney's offices, Southern District of New York and District of Columbia. They deserve extra scrutiny. But all other U.S. attorneys must receive blue slips. They don't get hearings before this committee typically, but we know that because of the blue slip process, there's been some oversight. Federal judges in D.C. don't have blue slips, but they get hearings before this committee. That means the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is the only U.S. Attorney or federal judge without either member oversight or a hearing. So let's change that. Let's make sure that going forward, nominees named by presidents of both parties have a hearing before this committee. I am deeply concerned about Mr. Martin's record, but I want a chance to hear from him under oath, and I want other D.C. attorneys in the future to have to appear before this committee under oath as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support Ranking Member Durbin's request that we have a hearing on the nomination. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your taking that into consideration. I want to address something related. Ranking Member Durbin talked about some of Ed Martin's incendiary comments about January 6th and the effort to reinvent what happened that day. Among the most significant efforts to reinvent what happened that day were, of course, the president's pardons of 1,550 people, including hundreds of those who violently attacked police officers. But the most recent development along those lines was the decision by the Justice Department to seek to foreclose the collection of restitution ordered by courts for people who broke into this building, assaulted police officers, vandalized the Capitol. The Justice Department is now taking the position that court-ordered restitution should not be paid. And basically what this all means is if you come to the Capitol and you engage in violence, you'll get a pardon by the president as long as you're engaging in that violence on his behalf. If you come to the Capitol and you want to vandalize the Capitol building, any of the Senate offices, if you want to trash the Speaker's office, and you're convicted, and the court orders you to pay restitution for the damage that you do, but that damage is being done in the president's name, then your obligation to pay restitution for that damage will be voided by the Justice Department. How is that justice? How is that anything but an encouragement to further violence, further vandalism for an administration that claims to be an administration about crime and law and order? They are pardoning violent criminals who attack cops. They are trying to appoint a U.S. attorney who glorifies people who attack cops. And they are now seeking to do away with any restitution being paid by people who attack cops and vandalize this building. And I think that's just shameful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And of course, I agree with Senator Durbin's request for hearing. I did want to just note, and as well as Senator Schiff's comments, I didn't even know about that, about the restitution. That's obviously absurd. But there's one other absurd thing that happened just yesterday that I think it's important for us to note. The president issued an extraordinary order directing the Justice Department to investigate Chris Krebs, someone I know, and I know many of this committee know, who had a very important job during the Trump administration. He was in charge of making sure that our elections were safe, that they weren't affected by foreign adversaries. He did a very good job during that time. I remember working with him in a nonpartisan basis. He'd been appointed by a Republican president. This is, of course, in the wake of what had been attempted in 2020, if people remember, with the Russians trying to get into election infrastructure. So here he comes in charge. He did his job. He worked with all different agencies and did his job to protect those elections. And so now, out of the blue, many, many years later, he gets fired by President Trump after the election last time, right? He gets fired by President Trump. And he then has been out there as a private citizen. So now the president has directed the Justice Department to investigate him, claiming that he falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. In fact, Trump's own attorney general at the time, William Barr, later testified in a deposition, I believe, that election was not stolen, and he had made many comments to the fact that the 2020 election, there was nothing wrong with the 2020 election, something Chris Krebs had said. I remember after the election, he said it was one of the safest elections in history in terms of foreign interference. So let's get this straight. Here's a guy doing his job, appointed by President Trump, does his job, acts in a nonpartisan basis, makes sure elections are safe, comes out after the election just like the Attorney General for President Trump and says the elections were fine, they weren't rigged, there was no interference. He gets fired for it. Okay, I think maybe that's enough. He gets fired for it. But now the president wants the Department of Justice to launch an investigation because Chris Krebs told the truth that the 2020's election infrastructure was secure. I just want to point out for the record that that's wrong. It's chilling. And this is what we have come to expect from this president. But our job is oversight. Our job is to step in when we think people are actually violating the Constitution or the Justice Department is not doing their jobs and is not keeping with the law. Certainly, Ed Martin's nomination is an example of that. But this order and what will come of it is something that we cannot just let be on a pile of orders that no one even noticed. They literally are asking the Justice Department to investigate a guy for simply telling the truth and doing the job. And I hope that our Republican colleagues will join us at some point in condemning this. Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.